Through the speakers, we're going to understand what it would mean for us to pop open the hood of the mind and leverage powerful technologies to address our most challenging neurological questions. So it is a delight to welcome to the stage Ramez Naam from Prime Movers Lab, Matt Engel from Paradromics, Amy Cruz from Prime Movers Lab, and Taryn Southern from BlackRock Neurotech. Enjoy, guys.
Thank you. Hello, SynBioBeta. We're going to wake you up here. So I'm Ramez Naam. We're going to talk about engineering the mind. I think we only have like 25 minutes, and we could go all day. We're going to try to cram it in really fast, and we're going to try to be, we're going to start with the practical and get provocative. We'll just do intros first. I'm your moderator. I'm not a biologist. I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm a computer scientist, which means I'm not a scientist at all. I'm an engineer. I'm a sci-fi author, so I wrote a number of books about neurotech as my main claim to fame. And I'm at Prime Movers Lab. We're a deep tech venture fund. It manages about $1 billion. We invest in all sorts of science to advance humanity, including neurotech and human augmentation. And I'm the chief futurist, I don't know what that means either, and a partner. So I'll stop there, and I'll hand it off to Taryn as the next speaker to introduce herself.
Thank you, Ramez. Hi, everyone. I'm Taryn Southern. I'm creative director at BlackRock Neurotech. My background trade is as a filmmaker and storyteller. I cut my teeth in the early days of content creation on YouTube and went on to make a number of different creative projects with emerging technologies in the AI, VR, and neurotech spaces. Most recently, I made a film called I Am Human, which followed 3 people with implantable brain-computer interfaces and actually featured some of the technology of the company that I work today. My focus is really on finding ways to inspire the public around these technologies and bring human faces to something that a lot of people may not easily understand.
Awesome. Thanks, Taryn. Amy, you're up next.
Hey there, I'm Amy Cruz. I'm a general partner at Prime Movers Lab that Mez just explained what we do in deep tech. I run our biology practice, which covers human augmentation and some of the crazy cool stuff that's happening in agriculture. I'm a neuroscientist by training, have a PhD in neuroscience, but didn't go into academia. Actually wandered out into the world very early in the neurotech revolution, was a program manager at DARPA for several years, funding neuroscience there, and then went back into the defense industry and most recently was at a startup called Optios, which is how I met the Prime Movers Lab team. They were the largest investor in my company, and now I'm an investor. And so really trying to pull together all of the threads that I've experienced over the last few decades in terms of neuroscience, synthetic biology, and how to change the mind.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy.
Yeah.
And Matt.
I'm the CEO and founder of Paradromics. We're a high data rate brain-computer interface company. And so that means that we're essentially building high data rate modems for the brain. And our thesis as a company is that the brain is fundamentally a data system. And so we think about in synthetic biology, how do we engineer biology and what's the right way to interact with sort of different biological systems. So a lot of what you do is reading and writing DNA. But the brain is a data organ, and so we're interested in how do we read and write data to the brain, and how do we reframe a lot of classically difficult to treat mental health and physical health conditions in terms of data. You know, blindness is an inability to get data into the brain, paralysis is an inability to get signals out of the brain, and starting from that standpoint to look at these types of conditions.
Awesome. Thank you, all 3 of you. So let's start. We've got this panel on engineering the mind. That's some big words. That's very big words, very sci-fi. Let's start with, we'll get, I'm sure, into the Borg and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. Let's start with, maybe we will. Sorry, did I say that out loud? Let's start with the practical and the here and now. You made a film about this, Taryn.
Yeah.
Why are we doing this at all?
Well, I mean, I think because we can see right now through the research studies and the real life people who are using these devices that they have tremendous impact, right? And so much of the public isn't even aware of what I feel are miraculous examples of this technology at work. You know, in my film, we followed a blind man, we followed a woman with Parkinson's, and a man with a paralysis condition. And all 3, you just get to witness the most mind-blowing results with brain implants. And of course, now that I'm at BlackRock Neurotech, working on a variety of technology with the intention of helping people move again, see again, hear again. And in the numerous clinical studies that we've done over the years, we have over 31 people with implantable brain-computer interfaces who have shown to be able to move robotic arms, digital devices. They're able to communicate with loved ones once again. We just had a study about an ALS patient come out a week or two ago who was able to communicate again after having been locked in. And the kind of applications of this technology are endless. The patients that we work with paralysis aren't just typing on a computer screen and re-engaging with spreadsheets and Word documents. They're also creating art and making music with these devices. And those are some of the stories that I'm really excited about telling in my role there. But I think that should be enough for us to say this is absolutely worth doing. We're changing people's lives both in functional ways and in creative ways as well.
That's amazing. So we're really trying to help people that have been harmed in some way today. Matt, I mean, your company is all about this. You're going to clinical applications first. What are the clinical indications that you're going after to start with, and how big is that population? How many people need this technology?
So we see this as a kind of ever-expanding sphere of applications, starting with people who have some of the most stressful conditions you can imagine, where they can't speak, they can't move, they're trapped in their body. Example was ALS that you gave. There's a population of patients that are, sign me up immediately. There are about 150,000 people in the US who can't speak or type. And then once we have this platform in tens of thousands of people, I think it allows us to ask questions about bigger applications. Knowing that the device is safe, there are, and we'll talk about this in our panel later today, there are a lot of mental health trials now using conventional deep brain stimulators and more conventional medical devices to try to treat depression with a device. Now, what could you do when you have a BlackRock device or a Paradromics device that's 100 or even 1,000 times more data flowing through it? The space for applications is really big.
Yeah. Fantastic. Amy, as an investor, you look at, we've heard a lot about mobility and paralysis. Yeah. I know we've looked at a whole lot of other indications. What are the other indications that you see where you can help people with this tech?
Yeah, no, so obviously, some of those initial things are right at the top of the list, right? And then you have what I would call starting to move into closed loop applications. So you have the ability to interact from a mental health perspective. You have the ability to reach deeper structures in the brain. You have the ability to combine these devices with pharmaceuticals, with other biologics, right? And so it starts to expand the space of not just replacing function, but also monitoring, enhancing function, actually all the work that's happening in epilepsy right now. We really see these conditions that have always been thought of as sort of maybe just areas of the brain that have sort of gone wrong, right? And the ability to actually start interacting with much larger structures in the brain. So obviously, very small devices looking at working in the motor cortex, but now we actually have electrodes that can span across the surface of the cortex and record much larger populations of neurons. And so I kind of see this toolkit coming together, right, of not only interacting with the brain in these conditions, but actually starting to engineer the brain in terms of the information flows in and out, including neurostimulation, so not just recording.
Okay. Yeah. So, Amy, we've talked, Matt and Taryn talked about pathways that are invasive, that require brain surgery. Yeah. We've got a couple interesting companies, Attune and Cognition, that are non-invasive. What's happening there?
Yeah, so this is a great example, again, of this sort of continuum of the way that we're looking at interfacing with the brain. You can think of it as invasive, minimally invasive, non-invasive, and then non-invasive in a neurostimulation sort of way. And so we have the ability to actually record signals from outside of the brain. You've obviously heard of maybe EEG or some other devices like that. Now companies are, in addition to the work that we're doing, recording those brain signals in real time, now folks are actually looking at minimally invasive recording systems where you're just either going under the scalp or maybe just into the surface of the skull to reduce the signal to noise, but actually extract the same type of signals. And then from a neurostimulation perspective, you're seeing transcranial focused ultrasound, transcranial magnetic stimulation, transcranial electrical stimulation. We're actually putting energy into the brain in order to modulate the networks and systems in the brain, both for, let's call it potentially enhancement of function, enhancing learning, or looking at conditions like sleep, insomnia, mental health conditions. The research has been really incredible in this space, and we're really excited about this whole continuum of ways to interact with the nervous system.
Fantastic. Matt, I want to unpack something you said. You talked about the brain as a data organ, and a lot of what we're doing is just getting data in and out. Is it really that simple as like just doing data I/O into the brain?
I mean, at an engineering level, yes. Fundamentally, everything that you do, everything that you perceive is neural activity. It's information coming to your brain from the senses. Everything that you're physically doing, you're doing with your muscles, which is driven by control signals coming out of your brain. And in the end, all of your thoughts, all of the decisions you make have underlying neural activity. That's the substrate for consciousness. And so, once you start to think about everything that can go wrong in the brain in terms of neural activity and from a data perspective, it's just a very powerful way of reframing things. Like, you wouldn't, if Microsoft Excel is not working on your laptop, you wouldn't crack it open and start looking at transistors and probing transistors. No,
That's
you
what
treat
I do.
it. You treat it at a software level, and so there are different levels in a computer stack. You have applications, you have an operating system, all the way down to semiconductor physics. And depending on your problem, you have to know where you are in the stack. And that's how it is for neuro as well.
Yeah.
Molecules treat the transistors. Pharmaceuticals are treating the transistors. But the problems that we have in mental health are network level effects. They're more like software level effects. And so knowing kind of how to engage that in the technical hierarchy is super important.
Okay.
I was just going to
Please.
add, I think that's actually one of the most important things about the way that we're looking at neuroscience now, is that it was very synaptic, transistor level for such a long time, and now with the tools and techniques that we have to look at the network functioning in the brain, it's a whole different game, right? Thinking about depression as a problem at some synapses, right, is totally different than thinking about depression as a network challenge in the brain and something where you can actually use multiple types of devices to shift that network back into optimal functioning. And I think that's the big breakthrough, right, is that not only the perspective that we have about how to modulate those systems, but the understanding that we have at that functional network level that gives us the door in, I would say. So I just wanted to add that.
And where are we on the volume of data we can get in and out of the brain, relative to how much is going on inside the brain, and on decoding those signals and understanding what they mean? So I asked the easy questions.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
super easy.
the brain, one of the things that's interesting to think about the brain is you have a gigahertz processor in your computer, but a neuron, if it's getting two inputs from two other neurons, it can't really tell the difference between which one came first if they're within a millisecond of each other. So if you wanted to peg a clock frequency to a neuron, you'd say it's about a kilohertz maximum. And so now you start to think about how is a data rate with the nervous system going to work? There's no high-speed bus. There's no USB in the brain. You have to record and stimulate as many neurons as possible. You want to pull as many neurons as possible. That's why the Utah array, when it came out, was a huge thing, because previously people had been doing single unit recordings with single tungsten wires, and all of a sudden there was this out-of-the-box package that did 100 at once. And so that's kind of where we are right now. Is people in clinical trials right now have Utah arrays, 1, 2, 4 Utah arrays, maybe a population of 100 to 400 neurons. Next generation technologies that are coming out are going to be 10, 20x that, and I think you're going to see the scaling every 2 or 3 years. Someone's going to come with a 2 or 4x better.
Wow,
system.
that's a lot.
And I think it's worth saying that not all applications require thousands of neurons to be recorded. When working with people with paralysis, for instance, there's a lot that you can do from this very small number of neurons that you're recording from. But as we look at diseases like depression or things that exist across various parts of the brain, then I think these kinds of new devices are very exciting.
Matching the technology to the application.
Yes.
Yeah.
Really
It's like the
critical.
toolkit, like we talked
Yeah,
about.
exactly.
Yeah, you have a whole toolkit now.
And the mix and match that Amy was getting at is also really important because bioelectronic medicine isn't necessarily going to supplant pharmaceuticals, but one of the problems with pharmaceuticals is that you don't get like good real-time readout of what's happening. It's hard to dose in real time, but imagine you combine a molecule that's kind of crappy for half the patients, works really well for the other half, with a BCI that can tell the difference between patients and can real-time look at biomarkers.
Yeah.
It gets really exciting.
Yeah, well, no, and just on the topic of biomarkers, one of the things that most people don't know is that when the early CNS drugs and drugs for mental health were developed, nobody ever actually measured the brain while those drugs were being developed, right? It's only now that we're actually starting to use EEG and functional magnetic resonance imaging while we're scanning CNS drugs to actually figure out how they're operating in the brain. And so that also gives you an incredible toolkit of biomarkers so that now, if you think about maybe a failed Alzheimer's drug, it could be the case that it failed because it was actually tested on the wrong subset or wrong population of people. If I have a biomarker that allows me to get the right people the right medicine, whether that's for Alzheimer's or for mental health disorders, I now, again, have a much wider sort of toolkit that I can use that really gives us access into the human mind and how to augment it.
Fantastic. Let's move on beyond healing. Taryn, in your film, I Am Human, it came out 2020, 2021?
2020.
2020. I was honored to have a small part in
You
that
were in it.
film.
Thank you so much. You were wonderful.
That's how we met. I was the talking head. You really, while you were following these patients that had disabilities, you really got into sort of the non-disability aspects and the impact on human meaning. Can you talk about that? What does this really allow us to do?
Sure. I mean, that was actually the greatest challenge in making this film is how do we walk down this path with these patients who are dealing with debilitating disease, neurological disorders, and then also explore this future path that, quite frankly, is the one that takes up all of the headlines in the news. And the interesting thing we realized was the enhancement/augmentation arguments that were being posed were actually best addressed through the lenses of our patients who were using the devices themselves. So for instance, Stephen, one of our patients who had the Argus 2 retinal implant, we follow him on his journey where he's able to then see shadowy figures where he once saw nothing at all.
Define these shadowy figures.
Shadowy figures, but at least enough to be able to navigate, a city street. And through his story, we learned that in the lab, they were testing other capabilities of this device, such as heat mapping technology inside the arrays, which would allow these patients to be able to cook on a stove and see where the fire is. I mean, all of a sudden, you've got clearly the world's first superhero. And it came out of a patient who had, a retinal disease. Same was the case with our Parkinson's patient, Anne, who, upon receiving her DBS implant, and she starts being stimulated, and she realizes that on top of just feeling a lot better and all of her tremors stop, her creative all of a sudden her creativity goes through the window. And she's working more hours on her art than she ever did when she was healthy. And she feels almost a kind of joy that she hadn't felt before. And so you're like, okay, interesting. They tweaked a few things, and all of a sudden she's a happier, more creative person. Hard to not see that as some kind of step toward augmentation. So I think one of the best ways that I've been looking at addressing this is going to the patients themselves and seeing, like, what has this device done for you? Another great example is Nathan Copeland out at University of Pittsburgh, who he had a bidirectional prosthetic arm, which basically allowed him to sense touch through this prosthetic arm. So he could feel items that he was manipulating, which also made it easier for him to manipulate the prosthetic arm. But in a sense, he was given like a new sense almost. It's not the typical touch that we all have. It's something that's being sent to the brain-computer interface, and he figures out what to do with those sensations. Fantastic. I don't know if I answered your question.
Well,
I'm so sorry.
No, you did.
I think it's just as a starting point for this, interesting to think about, well, the people who are receiving these devices to ameliorate disease and dysfunction are also getting other potential benefits.
So the ones that are sick will be the first enhanced.
They're the first enhanced.
I believe that. And the other thing I believe is that we are going to unlock the cognitive capacities of hundreds of millions of individuals that we've never had access to before. And it's sort of one of those things where I always get goosebumps when I talk about it, but when I think about assistive communication and what people have been able to unlock, like the NFT cat picture, and I mean, it really is an enormous amount of cognitive capacity in the world that's been limited. And imagine if, I'm just like looking forward to, we have on cognition, one of the companies we funded, we have a Brainiacs Council where we actually have individuals who have cerebral palsy and other motor disorders as part of the voices and stories that are told. And they're DJing with the headset on, right? And they're, I just want them to be like CEOs of major companies, right? And really have that breakthrough. And I think that's one of the things that unlocking the cognitive capacity of individuals does. It unlocks creativity, it unlocks intellect, it unlocks leadership, and so many things that people haven't had access to before. And I get so excited about that.
So let me ask the big picture, and I'll throw it out to all of you. What does this mean, like, if we're giving people these somewhat beyond human abilities, are we going to engineer ourselves into something beyond human? And what does that mean for ourselves, for our identity, for society? Are we transcending the current definition of humanity?
I love it when you leave the most difficult question for last, Matt.
Well, we've got only 3 minutes. Please explain in 3 minutes.
I think we can look at other technology trends to get a sense of like how this could go. Like, for instance, I wanted to go to Blue Bottle Coffee. It's about a block away from here, and I walked around the Marriott like 5 times because I tried to use my own sense of direction. Like, I've lost. I have already uploaded. It
does atrophy the more you use it.
Yeah, I have already uploaded navigation into my cell phone. So, like, yeah, I mean, we'll see certain things that we end up, pushing, I think, over time, whether it's a BCI or any other like expanding kind of cognitive enhancement tool. But also there were people when writing was invented who was like, oh, people are going to get so lazy they won't have to remember anything anymore.
Socrates bemoaned literacy because it was ruining the memory of the youth. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think this is a kind of age-old.
Is there any chance Socrates was right? Like, social media maybe has some side effects. Like,
I don't want to talk about social media.
Okay.
But I only want to talk about the brain.
But like general relativity, there are a lot of things that we've built in modern technology, modern science, kind of modern philosophy that really wouldn't have been buildable and sustainable in a world where we didn't write things. So like the fact that we don't have to do some of those like more mundane things that we can outsource to technology means that we free up time to do some higher level stuff.
Yeah, that's actually one of my favorite quotes from Garry Kasparov, who is the chess champion who initially was defeated by IBM's computer, but what most people don't know is that like the next year and a few years after that, he actually teamed up. So he made these teams of folks who were playing with the AI systems, the computers and the humans, and it turns out that humans and computers together beat the AI, right? And so the idea of like this centaur, the half man, half whatever. And I never know what the other half is. I always get that confused.
We're not building centaurs.
No.
Are you sure? That's not what I've heard.
No, but no, the idea of two things not, being combined and creating something greater than just that one element, I think is something to think about. If you think about enhancement of sensory processing, or if you think about Matt uploading his navigation skills to the computer, like I really do think that, freeing us up from some of the more mundane elements or adding senses, will make us a little bit more than human. And so then how do we interact with one another? I guess that's the topic for another panel.
Yeah.
So.
Awesome. All right, last comments, rapid fire. You each get 20 seconds, starting with Amy. What is the one thing in this field you're most excited about?
The one thing I am most excited about in this field is just unlocking the cognitive capacity of individuals. I think whether that's changing people's mental health or accessing other thoughts and creativity, I'm just most excited about that. Liberation.
Okay.
I'm going to say something really crass, and that's money. Because for 20 years, there has just been this backlog of amazing technology, amazing science, and it's kind of fumbled on the goal line. Like, we haven't been able to get big commercial applications of BCI. We haven't had big wins. And right now, like, we see, venture pouring into this area. It was over, $500 million invested last year. It's going to be more this year. I know at least 3 companies that are raising $100 million plus rounds. And that's where you can start doing real engineering, real products. And so it's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Okay, Taryn, last word.
I am so excited about the opportunities that we have to defy limitations across the board with these devices. I think we all know what it's like to have been touched with mental illness or have someone in your life who is touched with mental illness. And if I could just have my brain on its best day all the time, I would feel more human than any other version of myself. And so for that, I'm very excited.
Fantastic. Okay, give it up, everybody, for Amy Cruz, Matt Engel, and Taryn Southern. Thank you very much.
Thank you.